Before we get to the calculation piece, let's spend a little bit more time talking about the interpretation of the price elasticity of demand. Recall that we're focused primarily on the magnitude of elasticity, since it will always be negative. So what does it mean for elasticity to be larger in magnitude than 1? Well, we call this elastic demand because consumers, fairly flexible in their consumption choices, will change the quantity they purchase a lot relative to the change in price. Return to this fraction. When this fraction is larger than 1, it means the numerator is larger than the denominator. So when the price elasticity is greater than 1, we know that the percent change in quantity demanded is larger than the percent change in the price. This means that consumers respond a lot to price changes, telling us that consumers are fairly flexible in their consumption choices, and in response to a change in price will decrease or increase the quantity that they choose to purchase by a large amount. Now let's think about what that means in terms of total revenue. Remember that an increase in price leads to an increase in revenue per sale, but a decrease in the number of sales. These two conflicting forces that push total revenue either up or down. When we have elastic demand, we know that the quantity change, the decrease in sales, is large relative to the increase in price. So we'll be able to conclude that that will result in a decrease in total revenue. So when we have elastic demand, increases in price will lead to decreases in total revenue, and vice versa. When demand is inelastic, it means that this fraction is less than 1. Or in other words, the price change is larger than the quantity change. So here we know that for any change in price, the quantity change will be small relative to the price change. Notice I'm using this delta to represent change, which is typical in mathematics and physics and economics. And we'll talk more about how to calculate that in the future video. So inelastic demand means that consumers are not very flexible, right? When you hear the word elastic, you should think about a rubber band. How stretchy is it? How flexible is it? How responsive is it to changes in pressure, right? So here we're trying to measure how flexible are consumers, how responsive are consumers to changes in price. And when demand is inelastic, it means they're not flexible. They do not change their consumption very much when the price changes. So consumers are not very responsive to changes in price. And that means that if we have an increase in the price, this decrease in quantity sold is small, leading to an overall increase in total revenue. So if demand is inelastic, increases in price will lead to increases in total revenue, and that means that you would be happy about the increase in the price of your book. So you can see that the answer to the first question that we posed is really, it depends. And it depends on the price elasticity of demand. There's one more type of elasticity here that we haven't talked about, which is what happens if the price elasticity is equal to 1. And for demand, this is a particular point along the demand curve that is especially important to our consideration of total revenue. When demand is unit elastic or equal to 1, then we know that total revenue is maximized. This is the point along the demand curve that yields the highest possible total revenue. And this point occurs at the midpoint of the demand curve. In other words, halfway down the demand curve. We're going to look at the graphs in the next video, but hopefully this gives you a good foundation for understanding the interpretation of elasticity.